Welcome to our fifth podcast episode. Sorry, I'm Alex Kimbrough, your host. Each episode will be interviewing passionate professionals and students. Whether you're a student, an early career professional, or a veteran in the field, after every interview, you will have learned something new about public health and the warriors who fight the good fight every day. Before our next segment, this podcast is funded by AHEC, the Area Health Education Centers program. AHEC is a federally funded program established to improve the supply, distribution, retention, and quality of primary care in other health practitioners in medically underserved areas. AHEC provides support services for information dissemination on healthcare issues and participates in collaborative community-based research. If you're interested in learning more about AHEC or Project Brotherhood, what this is a part of, please go to those according sites. So, our guest tonight is Heather Holland. She has a master's in human relations and labor relations from the University of Illinois, Wisconsin Milwaukee, and a bachelor's in communication from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She has experience in working in people spaces for over 15 years. Welcome to the podcast, Heather.
Thank you, Alex. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for taking your time out for being with us tonight. So,
Absolutely.
so I'm going to start with a very obvious question. But what is human resources?
That is a good question because definitely I feel like the profession has evolved and people only know what they know or know what they're exposed to. So, in this probably most, maybe shortest form, human resources is, in the workplace, dealing with people, all things people business. So, think about from the time you are looking to get into a workplace to the time you leave a workplace. So it is definitely way more than hiring and firing. And I'm going to use like non-technical terms.
Mhm.
How do you move about an organization? How do you get promoted? How do you, what talent and what skill set? So anything about people and also kind of the positive, the good behavior, and also the not so good behavior. So anything around people, business, and how you show up at work.
Oh wow, that's interesting. I know you said before the the beginning of this before the beginning of the podcast, you were saying that it is almost like a teaching moment, or it's definitely a lot of teaching instead of being with kids, which you're doing with bigger kids. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I like to look at it. There's different parenting styles, there's different
Mhm,
leadership styles.
mhm,
And HR is very much an agent of the company or the organization, but HR is also meant to be an advocate. But my role as an HR professional is helping you as the employee advocate for yourself or helping a leader advocate or demonstrate their leadership skills. I always say, because people say, well, HR fired me. No, I didn't fire you unless you're part of my team. You got yourself fired. So my
mhm.
role in that example is helping that manager or leader helping him manage his employees and the process. And if that manager needs to fire someone, the manager says the words, not HR. That's not my role. My role again is to coach, advise, and consult. And so that's what I mean when I say teacher. You're very much it's a matter of passing on my knowledge to others, whether it be through a manager and employee, and helping you figure out how to navigate the system within the workplace policies and procedures.
That's actually fascinating. I've actually never thought of it is like coaching. Like
Yeah.
like I'm honestly like falling into that same where it's like, oh, HR is kind of like the hiring hiring portion of it. So like, this is actually interesting. Like that it is definitely like advocating and yeah, I like it that like that kind of I never seen it like HR in that kind of way. But you did talk about how HR like you did kind of talk about how HR is involved in like advocating. Is
Mhm.
there anything that what can HR do, for us or for employees at any site?
I'd say the first thing you can do as an
Mhm.
employee is what you do for yourself. Learning or figuring out what is your purpose. Are you there just for a job? Are you looking for a career? I would say the most basic thing is and I can't sort of stress this enough. Understand what you get is basically a contract. You get a job. You're saying, I will work for you in exchange for X pay X number of benefits, and in exchange, as the employer, I provide you work for me, you follow these rules, and know that, and that's basically the inherent contract. But so many employees don't even understand, okay, yeah, what's the pay, but what are the benefits? How do you even use that to your advantage? So from your medical to your dental to your 401k or your pension plan, whatever the case may be. So I'd say the first thing is know and understand what your benefits are. And HR is there to help you through that. But also, how do you use that to your advantage? So if you have a 401k, a lot of people, HR is nagging me or harassing me about putting my beneficiaries. There's a very good reason. And you should evaluate your beneficiaries every year, especially you as an employee, and don't pass it off to your partner, significant other. But those beneficiaries are there in the event something happens to you and you have life insurance. The life insurance company pays that policy out to your beneficiary. If you have no beneficiary on file, that money goes in probate and gets caught up. That money is also protected from, taxes. It's handled differently than your 401k. So you're also you're not protecting yourself, your loved ones, and really taking care of your business if you don't have beneficiaries on there. And the benefits is kind of one small example. Other things you can do to help advocate for yourself. If you're when it comes to career and development, and there's very much the sort of path of employees being kind of the steward of your own career and navigating where you want to go. What does that look like? What does that career path look like? And it doesn't have to look like what everyone else's looks like, but understand what skill sets are required. So I'll kind of pause there to see if there's any further questions, because I said a lot and jumped a couple topics as well.
Oh yeah, no. That made a lot of sense. I like I said, I'm liking the way that HR is definitely. It sounds like it's advocacy. Like it's advocacy, and like the thought of like HR. When it's talking about protection, and when it's talking about like you're talking about life insurance and how they're kind of nagging you, to protect the health of you and your family. Like
Yeah.
I've never, like I said, another perspective shift for me when it comes to HR. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I
But you
think
did,
that's one of the things
yeah.
HR is seen as, and in some cases, it still is implemented in a very sort of traditional way. And I don't like the traditional aspect of HR, so I choose not to do that. But
Mhm.
and so I think sometimes that also contributes to how you see your HR and how they move about an organization, but that's not the way it necessarily has to be. Um, and there's opportunities to kind of create a different picture. So, I'm glad to kind of hear you say that you like the advocacy part, and you're seeing HR in a different light.
Yeah, I think and I like I said also like the way you said you essentially redefine what the role is.
Yeah.
I'm actually really curious though. How did you get into HR, or what was that path like? Did you wake up one day thinking you're going to be in HR, or what's that look like?
Not at all. I had no idea what HR was initially at first. I started out um, initially wanting to go to law school. And I wanted to, I did know when thought I wanted to go to law school, I was fascinated by the employment relationship. And I was fascinated around what was fair, what was right, employees being treated fairly. And so when I discovered, so I was like, okay, I learned about labor and employment law. So I said, I want to be an attorney, labor and employment law, and work in the workplace, and, try to help make things right. But when I learned what an attorney does, and specifically a labor and employment attorney, to me, they're too far away from the action. So once I discovered that, I decided I didn't want to be an attorney, because as the labor and employment attorney, if there's, for example, a complaint or a discrimination suit, the labor and the attorney is basically reading the complaint or filing the documents in court. To me, that was not interesting. I wanted to be right there where the action happened. And I happened to learn that by just chance, or I guess not so much chance, but randomly learned about human resources and labor relations. And labor relations is, where there's a union involved. in a non-union environment, you're typically dealing with HR. So I learned about that aspect of the employment relationship, and I said that's where what I wanted to get into. So by that time, I'd already finished my undergrad, and then I went to grad school in human resources and labor relations, and I went to University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. And what I liked about that program is very much a practitioner-based program. So my labor and employment professor, he was a practicing attorney in Chicago and Milwaukee. So sometimes we'd be helping him with his cases as part of our coursework. Or the bargaining class, he was an actual bargaining agent for a union in the Milwaukee area. And so that's how I got into HR and began to and loved it. And I started in manufacturing in a very, probably a not very industry that is not very diverse, that is heavily male dominated. And for me, that environment worked. I was in manufacturing and steel, and in kind of high conflict environments where there was just always something going on, like kind of back in the day where like people were literally fighting at work. And sometimes it still happens, hopefully not often or at all, really.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how a little bit of how I first got started or got into HR, and where I once I got my experience or degree, where I took it in terms of the workplace.
That's interesting. I do want to add though, uh, I worked for like a little bit over a year. I worked in a factory.
Uh-huh.
It was a salad dressing factory, but a factory nonetheless. And it was they still had a lot of drama there. Like you'd be surprised. I was like, really? I was 22, and I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I feel like I'm the most mature person here, but I remember a lot of drama still going on in the salad dressing factory. I
There
imagine.
was a lot, and that's the point when you bring up about youth. The other thing was I was typically the one of the younger people, if not the youngest. So the people that I may
Mhm.
be coaching, typically, then I had many comments like, "You're my child's age, but I'm not your
Mhm.
kid."
Right.
And working together, but and I don't know what it is sometimes about manufacturing or other heavy service related industries. They tend, from an HR and from a people perspective, they are very people and work intensive,
Mhm.
like a hospital, because there's just always some drama. I mean, if you think about it from the human perspective, we're all people. We all have issues, and maybe you had a bad day that morning, or you had
Mhm.
a fight with your spouse. Just because you come to work, those problems don't go away. They come with you to work, and then you layer on, if you don't like your job or you have issues there. I mean, sometimes it's a recipe for you. You just never know what will happen. And so
Mhm.
I always say, where there are people, there will be conflict. Conflict is not always bad, but how do you manage the people in that conflict for that time, that moment, that day, etc.
Yeah, so I can imagine. With like it is very hard to like sometimes separate, work from home. I mean, work from home when it comes to the issues and stuff like that. Do you guys? So, what kind of do you have any additional training to prepare for that kind of in the as for the HR role or the coaching role? So, what other are there any certifications you can get to enhance yourself, or what does that kind of look like when it comes to extracurricular advancement?
Yeah, there are options, and if you talk to different HR professionals, I think a lot of them entered the field in different ways. You can get a master's, bachelor's, or MBA in some aspect of human resources, or focus in human resources. You don't necessarily have to have a human resources degree to get into human resources. You can. There's also certification. SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resources Management, is the most popular, not the only certifying body, but they certify HR professionals. So you can actually work in the human resources field without certification. Certification is becoming more sort of popular or prevalent as well. And then there's the Human Resources Certification Institute that also certifies HR professionals. And then there's various universities that offer human resources certification, like a certificate, where if you wanted to have, and some may require a degree, some may not, but if you sort of also if you're just curious, LinkedIn
Mhm.
Learning has a lot of information around, and I think a lot of uh, little bit more neutral information versus if you're going looking at a university is going to be slanted toward toward a particular university. But there's a couple
Mhm.
universities like Cornell University in New York, University of Illinois Champaign Urbana, and some other like a Rutgers and some other schools that are probably just more well known for human resources, which doesn't so I'd say check into, degrees, check into certifications, check into if it's something you think you're interested in. If you have the option, see if you can shadow, like an HR professional or talk to an HR professional to find out what they do and what aspect of HR they're in, because some may specialize and some may be generalists. So you may not like. I don't like doing benefits, so I don't work in benefits.
Mhm.
You're usually calling because you have a problem, and I
Mhm.
always say, all I need to do is, and all I want to do is understand my own. Everybody else can understand theirs. So,
Right.
and we all have, our preferences and the aspects of HR that we like.
Does this is another interesting question? Does HR have HR? I'm curious about that as well.
Absolutely, depending on the size of the company, if that model, who do you support, who you go to, the processes and uh, policies are in place for all employees, including
Mhm.
HR. So if I happen to be in HR and I have a complaint, the step that says go to HR, I would skip that step
Right.
and potentially go to my manager unless the manager's a problem, and follow the process there.
Mhm.
But yeah, I've been in HR and worked with other HR professionals or led a team of other HR professionals or provided HR support to other HR professionals. So it really just depends on the structure and the model. But there are, I guess groups and organizations. If I'm a team of one, some companies are a team of one, some have bigger teams, but where you can exchange ideas and say, how did you implement this? How did you, um, if you're changing systems, for example, or you kind of have a question around a policy, and sometimes that's also the benefits of being a member of a professional organization like a SHRM, because you have those built-in resources.
Hmm. Yeah. So, I know we kind of briefly talked about when, like what HR, what you do in HR. For an employee, what are some of the times when they should go to HR?
Ooh, I'd say, and to be so, some of the times when an employee should go to HR,
Mhm.
if you have a question about a policy, so not the fact that you want someone to read it for you. One, you should kind of read and understand, but if you want to better understand how it's applied in that environment, or
Mhm.
there's something specific that you don't understand, in the case of let's say a complaint, or you feel like someone's harassing you or bothering you, HR might be a good place to start. Again, I always refer people to the policy, because the
Mhm.
policy lays out basically what the rule book is and what the playbook is. So at least understand that. I'm not saying go to the policy and don't do anything else, but at least do
Mhm.
your homework so you understand and you come with a kind of a foundational knowledge when you start talking to that HR person. Because first thing I'm going to do is start asking you questions. Well, what happened? I'm going to probably first, what did you already do? What
Mhm.
happened and all this stuff. So you need to be able to answer those sort of questions. And I will say again, in fairness, not all HR professionals are created equally. Because I've
Mhm.
worked in environments and I've heard other people say, "Well, HR is the main gossip." If you don't feel like you can trust HR, which
Mhm.
can be a big issue, that's the importance of knowing the policy to know what your other options are, if you have an issue that you need to work through. Other things where you might be able to come to HR, especially if you feel like you can trust them. HR is very much a coach and an advisor, and should be and maintain confidentiality. So, for example, if you're having problems with your boss and you want to know how you should handle it and what's your next step, as long as there's sort of not any immediate danger or something that I need to report right away, that conversation stays between you and I. I'll give you some advice, and it's just that it's advice. You can take it or leave it. You can choose not
Mhm.
to. And so those are a few examples of when an employee might or should come to HR.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's very much yeah, human resources helping them like, employees navigate their space. I
Yep.
think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. How do you help? Like I said from the beginning, it's the people
Mhm,
business. So how do you help the people in that business navigate the business and
mhm.
um, understand the sort of culture? Because in most cases, so my philosophy is a good HR professional. No one knows that organization like an HR professional. So if you want some insider information, again, I can't tell you everything, but
Right.
if you want to know how to navigate and how do you, maybe I want to get promoted. How do I get there? What's kind of the best route? That is very much kind of within that wheelhouse of HR. Or at least if I can't tell you, I probably have an idea on a resource that I can refer you to.
Hmm. That's actually really good to know is that they do have the insider info for everything.
They do, and just about everything. So I've been in situations where, yeah, maybe there was going to be a layoff or someone was going to be fired. Did I know? Yes. And my philosophy is approach. Well, one, don't ask me anything. I can't tell you because I
Right.
will say, well, look, I can't tell you. There might be something going on. Yes.
Hmm.
And so that transparency and the communication and like yeah there may be some type of restructuring going on, but the details of the restructuring I can't tell you anything more than that.
Yeah, that's yeah, that makes sense. Like, but it
But
still
yeah,
is really
people will get mad because you won't tell them.
right. You'd be
Well,
like, I
you
mean, I don't
realize
have a
that's my
choice.
job that I can't. And we talked about confidentiality, etc.
Right. How can I be confidential but then spill all the tea to you? I don't.
Right.
It can't
I
be
won't
both.
tell. Yes, you will.
Yeah. 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 You probably would. Like you'll even if you say it unconsciously, you'll probably say something.
Well, employees talk. I mean, as much as you can say, this information is confidential, don't share your salary. What do people immediately go do? Um, they talk about that. So, there are times when that confidentiality should be maintained. So, for example, if there's a complaint, and I've been in an environment where I've had to investigate complaints, whether it was complaints of harassment or discrimination, or somebody was being unfair, and in order for me to get down to the truth and what really happened, and as I'm talking to each person, please keep this conversation confidential. I lay out the steps of what's going to happen, lay out the process. And no sooner before I even get to the next person, well, she was here, she was coming to talk to you. So you've already tainted the investigation. So, how do you really make sure you get a fair shot
Hmm.
if you don't let the process truly work?
Yeah, that's very. That does make things a little more complicated. One of my questions though is what I want to say. What do you live for when it comes to working in HR? Like, what's the most exciting thing to you to do?
I love, uh, if I'm not sure I really live for just anything work related.
Right.
I will, but if what I like doing, I like helping people help themselves. I think at heart, I'm a coach by nature.
Oh,
So I like helping you understand, um, I like also sharing what I know. How do you navigate this sort of system? Here's how this process works. And I think also from a talent and people perspective, how do you make sure you're in the right spot? Because we work too many hours to hate what we do. So how do you at least get to a point where you can like what you do? Sometimes that might mean moving jobs. Sometimes it might mean moving companies. So how do you, I think probably one of the things that I like doing most is helping people kind of figure out where they're meant to be.
hmm. I do like
But it's a
that.
two-way process.
Right.
It's not me like coming up with all these answers. It's really like me kind of interviewing you, asking you 1,000 questions and listening to what you say versus and also what you don't say. Um, But that's time intensive and it's difficult to do with every single person. But if I was, in the ideal state, in that's my ideal kind of like piece that I would be doing is that talent with the intersection of diversity as well.
Ooh, that's interesting. Diversity. Yeah, that's always an important thing in the workplace. And like I said, I was thinking about it. Like, yeah, diversity is like that's
Mhm.
interesting too. Can you talk about diversity in HR? Because I know sometimes we do have like diversity trainings, at least in my job. But what do you? How do you? How do you? I guess have diversity in HR, and how do you like kind of meter that out to everyone, all the employees, where you work?
So diversity is a big word with a lot of tentacles. I mean,
Mhm.
diversity is a function, just like finance is a function, or account, or supply chain is a function. So diversity as a function has definitely um, kind of blossomed, but in its basic sense, you want to have diversity of your workforce and look at the different dimensions of diversity: race,
Mhm.
gender, um, uh, national origin, sexuality, LGBTQ status. And that's one aspect of diversity. But what about different levels of experience, different industry experience, um, and even within a function, like within HR, oh, excuse me,
No problem. No problem.
within like HR, finance, accounting, whatever, even as attorneys, is everyone on the leadership team white man?
Mhm.
That's not very diverse at all. Or does everyone come from one particular college? That's not very diverse at all, because different ways of thinking, different mindsets. So how do you, I say that foundation is being able to talk about diversity and what diversity means to each person.
Mhm.
And organizationally, what does diversity mean? What is our sort of outlook and philosophy on diversity? Do we care? Are we regulated? Are we required to have diversity? For example, if you're a federal contractor, then you have some legal reporting requirements that you have to undertake.
Hmm. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So one of my other questions would be, um, I think it's really good to, like I said, like HR is, like this is really interesting. I was thinking about, um, do you ever like can see yourself as like you talk about advocacy and coaching, and that. Do you ever think about like HR in a perspective of like health at all? Like when it comes to protecting the health of the patient, not patient, sorry. I work in the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
In the health of the employees at all? Like it's almost like a safeguard for the health of the employees there.
There is a direct, I mean, there's an intersection that if you talk about your physical health or
Mhm.
mental health, um, from a workplace safety standpoint. Um, I was sharing before the show, I lived in Texas and Texas, Louisiana, where the gun laws are just completely different. There, you have to worry about employees. They may go hunting after work, so they may drive their personal vehicle and sometimes a company vehicle and have a gun in there.
Mhm.
And while their intent may be go to hunting, but that's also not safe for everyone else. So, when you see those signs like no guns on the premises, it's part of that overall workplace safety. There's a mental health aspect. There is, because any workplace, um, when you have people, you're looking at, what kind of what's that mental, physical, emotional health, and even HR. That may not be my wheelhouse, but there's those resources for that. So your
Mhm.
benefits you may have access to an employee resource program. And when you talk about a health environment like a hospital, which I admire HR professionals in hospitals. It is not for me, but because you have the hospital or the medical aspect, then on
Mhm.
top of that, you have the people aspect and sort of the hierarchy there. But even you talk about protecting people's data. So it's obvious in a medical setting, there's lots of personal data, but in a sort of private or corporate setting, part of that is protecting people's health information because you're signing up for benefits. We work with providers. A company works with a provider to provide you with some type of medical service, and protecting that information because you have a lot of information. And for those benefits, does the claim rate go up because you have either a healthier or a not as healthy population? So there is some level built into HR around um, protecting the health of the employee, the health of the organization, and that may be the physical health, the organizational health, the mental health, and what partners do you use to who specialize in those different areas.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So that is really cool though that they still do also have a hand in maintaining the health of employees. Sorry, again, employees. Um, so can I'm trying to think of this. So what were some particularly interesting cases that you've had, over the course of your career? Can you talk about them, or maybe not? Or
Of course, it won't be with any names or
right,
or,
right.
or specifics. One that always just stands out and still amazes me, and now I can laugh about it.
Mhm,
Um, I was early in my career, um, in a manufacturing setting is where
mhm,
I worked. And in the manufacturing industry, this in particular environment, it was a plant and a corporate office. So at some point I'd worked at both, but this was in the plant environment.
mhm,
It was actually, I'd say like the plant manager and the HR um, manager did not get along. I reported to the HR manager. I was like the HR supervisor.
mhm,
So I was often the sort of referee. Both were probably at least twice my age.
mhm.
Um, and one day they got into a fist fight at the holiday party,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I had to break it up. Um,
Wow.
so I had some words to say that I can't repeat here, and then I left it because I'm like, look, one, it's ridiculous.
Right.
And you all need to fix it because this doesn't need to create any type of work. But it literally happened. Like two grown men like going blows at a holiday party, and given their roles, the other employees were there. So it was interesting. So that was in the 90s. Hopefully that wouldn't happen today, but um, I'm rarely surprised. I would say another example is uh, there was a complaint that an employee had stole some company property.
Mhm.
Another manufacturing environment, and and it's also steel, like metals or steel industry. So you have
Right.
big pieces of metal sitting
Yeah.
around. So the complaint or the story was that the employee stole some type of metal, loaded it up on the truck where you needed some equipment to steal it or allegedly steal it.
Mhm.
The employee said that they did not steal it. However, the security camera caught them stealing it. Um, and the camera, if I remember right, the camera caught them stealing some other stuff that we weren't initially aware of.
Mhm.
And then there's one more example, which this one is interesting because it's not something you typically think of, and it's not as physical. Like, a lot of now as I think about it, there's lots of examples. People always think they can beat a drug test. And although they've changed a lot now, but
Right.
it's still hard to beat a drug test. I'm not saying it's impossible because I'm not an expert, but I tell people just don't try it. Most time you can't.
Right.
But um, someone, so they went in to go take the drug test. And this was back in the day when we had kind of like a nurse on site. And we found out later they basically had a balloon taped to the inside of their leg with someone else's urine in the balloon and tried to pass it off as their drug test. And clearly it didn't work, because what you don't realize is, the specimen cup you put it in has a temperature reading. Your urine is a certain temperature. So once it leaves your body, it's no longer that temperature anymore.
Right.
And they tried to say, well, no, I didn't do anything, when clearly, yeah, you're already guilty, because it wasn't your urine
Right.
to start. So just a couple interesting examples, and, all type of, and it's not just their stories, even at the professional level. So it's not just kind of in the plant environment. And depending on what the issues, so one more, I'd say when it comes to like drug use, for example, sometimes it's not always, sometimes you kind of have to watch out for the sort of office or the white collar employees more than those who work on the plant floor. The plant floor, sometimes because more it's a safety issue, but because you may be operating equipment, but in the office, there's probably just as many drug users in an office as there is on the plant floor, is what I'm trying to say.
Wow,
Sometimes more.
those are vastly different examples. You got you literally being a referee, like breaking up a fight, almost like a boxing match. Then you got being like a true detective, like watching the security cameras and seeing how that makes sense. But then also being a person that is, what's a good analogy for that one? It's like like working in a forensic lab about like, oh yeah, urine after after a certain amount of time cools down, like this isn't real, this is yours. All of that is HR is
Interesting.
involved in
And
all
I'm not, like I said, my undergrad is in communication, so that's not my background. But
that.
by
Right.
over time and experience and working with our healthcare partners, like, the most companies, you send your drug test out to a lab. The lab, they're the experts, so they tell you about what they're, there's a reading, a certain level of the results, and you ask questions. What does this mean? Sometimes you may have to follow up, and they'll send it to a medical review officer, which is typically a doctor. So there's very much a nice, healthy relationship, because with health professionals, because you utilize them for some of your key resources to bring employees into the organization. If you do a drug test or some level of a background check, if you do random drug tests, if from your healthcare every day, and some of those same disparities that we see in the workplace, are or even reverse to some of those same disparities we see in healthcare, you actually see in the workplace. The disparities are probably no different. It's just different types of disparities based on the industry. There's healthcare disparities. There's also disparities in the workplace.
Interesting. That's an interesting question too. So when it comes to disparities, like on workplace disparities, so what do those kind of look like? In healthcare disparities, a lot of times are like health outcomes. But what do those workplace disparities look like? Are they usually amongst maybe like between managers and employees, or from employee to employee? What do those disparities kind of look like?
It varies, and disparities in what it looks like or what it sounds like in the workplace may be, I feel like I don't belong. I feel like I'm discriminated against. Those may be some of the words that are articulated, but what it looks like in kind of practice or in data, for example, is one part of the organization is like, if we look at kind of the diversity of your workforce, it's like, and we look at the availability of, let's say, women in a particular field, and it shows that they're available in the marketplace at 50%, but you only have like 5% women. Why don't you have any women on your team? Or maybe in some cases, maybe it's in the reverse, where there's a department of 100 people, let's say 50 men, 50 women, but only the women get promoted. Why is that? Those are examples of a couple disparities. And when you are just like you're analyzing your the behavior and the data behind it, the data kind of points you, and some of it is not always data. Some of it is you may have a hunch, like maybe this leader, there's been complaints about a particular leader being unfair to their team. And so that's the anecdotal. So where's the data behind it? What is their promotion looks like? What do their performance rates look like? So those are some examples of what disparity could look like in the workplace.
Interesting. So HR also does some number crunching too over there.
Believe it or not, HR is not just people. There is absolutely
Oh wow.
some number and data involved, and the ability to do that. For example, as people come and go into organization, you may look at how frequently people leave and what's your turnover rate, and how quickly have people come into or left an organization, or in particular a certain part of the organization. If HR, for example, you have this revolving door, something's going on. What is that? You kind of get down to the bottom of it. And if you have, 5 people have left in less than a year, that's figuring out what's significant versus what's not significant. But 5 people coming and going, especially if it's only a team of 5, will be
Right.
quite significant.
Right. That's really high. Yeah. So even they investigate trends. I think that's really cool too.
Yeah.
The very diverse team. So I was curious also what department, I guess HR is for everybody. Which one do they kind of work with the closest? I was thinking about I don't know, benefits, or what, is there a particular department that HR is like really besties with, or what?
Well, you mean which function within HR or which function outside of HR are you typically closer to?
I guess I would say outside of HR.
So outside of HR, at the it may depend on structure, but generally speaking, HR is probably closest to the sort of leadership team.
Mhm.
So if you're talking about a CHRO, typically they're going to be close with the CEO, whoever the sort of leadership team is running the organization, because HR is your primary people advisor. So if you're running that company, don't you want to know from your people experts, what's the health of the organization when it comes to people? And so you're typically very close to the sort of leadership team or the C-suite, for example.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I think that is pretty close to all of my questions for today. I really
Awesome.
appreciate you coming on to our podcast.
Well, I appreciate you for having me. I love the questions. It was a nice variety. It brought out some different stories that I don't probably normally tell or have forgotten about, because they sort of happened so long ago. And they're actually kind of funny. In the moment, they were not funny at all.
Right.
But I think you have to have, in the moment they weren't, but maybe 5 minutes later, it was like, oh my God, can you believe that? And I can't tell that to anybody except for maybe some other HR friends.
Right.
Of course, still without names and examples. But yeah, if you could sit in a room with a bunch of HR people, I'm sure they'd have tons of really good stories.
Oh my gosh, yeah, just dealing with people in general. That's people's stories and across time. So interesting.
Yes, and
No.
adults with just lives and different experiences, and therefore there comes different stories. Funny, sad, like unbelievable, and but
Yeah.
I'd say there's definitely a parallel to life. It is, you're dealing with people, and people come from different aspects of life, and they have different lived experiences and different work experiences, and it shows up.
hmm Shows up on how they deal with things, and you know what happens at the workplace. And I would love to be able to fly a wall, just have a coffee house chat with nothing but like HR, just listening to all the crazy stories. Um,
Definitely.
but yeah, so like I said, thank you all. I mean, thank you for coming on this podcast.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you.
also, once again, to everyone out there, thank you to all the listeners and watchers of our podcast. And we'll be back soon with another episode. Like I said, thank you again, Heather, for coming on tonight. If you're interested in other careers, please contact us at the banner below. And stay safe, everyone, and have a great night.
Great. Thanks, Alex.